Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erin Farley, and I'm one of JRSA's research associates. For those of you who may be less familiar with JRSA, it stands for Justice Research and Statistics Association, and we are a national nonprofit organization dedicated to the use of research and analysis to inform criminal and juvenile justice decision-making. And we are comprised of a network of researchers and practitioners, which at the core include directors and staff from state statistical analysis centers. I would like to take a moment to thank our partners at the Bureau of Justice Statistics for helping make this webinar possible. And I would like to introduce our speakers today in our session. So the webinar today is titled Building a Foundation for Analytics. And speaking are Stephanie Lopez-Howard, who is the Georgia SAC Director. Also speaking today is Joseph Hogan, who is a Solutions Architect, and Tasmia Alman, who is a Visual Analytics Consultant. And both Joseph and Tasmia work in the Information Management and Analytics practice at Salome. So with that, I welcome everybody to today's webinar, and I will get out of the way and pass the presentation over to Joseph. So passing the magic ball, and you should see it any second now. Okay.
All right, so actually this is Stephanie Lopez-Howard, the SAC Director in Georgia. I'm actually going to kick off the presentation. Those are our darling faces on the screen that you see there. I've had the pleasure of working with Slalom for a few years on this initiative, and Joseph is the solutions architect who helped me come up with our strategy, so I am immensely thankful to him because before we started working with Slalom and really pinning down what exactly it is that I wanted, I was drowning in a sea of data and vendors and aimless ideas. So what I want to go over today with Joseph and Tasmia is why does it matter to do first a business analysis piece to make a determination about how you're going to do data integration, data warehousing, visual analytics for your agency, and so on and so forth. From there, Joseph will take over and talk about generally like what the information strategy could potentially look like. Tasmia will do a pretty awesome whiz-bang presentation of Power BI, which is where we landed for our visualization platform, and then we'll take questions. So why now? One of the things that struck me when I did the presentation on data sharing at the JRSA Eastern Regional training was that we all were talking in circles around some of the same stuff, but we were kind of coming at it from different angles, and a lot of people were focused on how do I make this look pretty and shiny without necessarily thinking about or talking as much. Maybe they have thought about it and it's well implemented, but we weren't talking about it, the guts behind the bright and shiny object. The bright and shiny object is a visualization tool, right? We had a Tableau demonstration. Today we're going to do a demonstration with Power BI, but none of that really matters or is all that useful if your data aren't organized in a way that makes sense. And all of that comes from information management strategy and organization. Whether it's a data vault or understanding at the very least all of the different sources you're going to connect to and how you present those, it really depends on what's going to work for your organization, but the foundation of all of that is information management strategy, which Joseph is going to go over. And when I first started talking about data sharing and data warehousing and data integration, I started talking to a bunch of vendors who make it seem like you can just connect to a bunch of native systems and put together this beautiful dashboard that ultimately makes no sense when you actually turn over a lot of your data and tell them, yeah, sure, give me a demo. So that really made me realize and step back to say, okay, I'm doing something wrong. Something is not making sense, or either I am not communicating myself well or they're not understanding what I want, but I need to figure out how do I tell people what I need. So we engaged with Slalom Consulting First, for the business analysis, what did I really want? What was I after? And Joseph really helped me figure that out, and he'll talk about that process in the business analysis piece. But the biggest thing that we really were after is, how are we going to pay for this thing? Do we have resources in-house that we can leverage, and if so, how? So what is our current technology state at the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council or whichever organization you're in? How do we build it? What platform is it going to sit on? Are we talking about SQL Server because we're a Microsoft shop? Are you an Oracle shop? Is it an Oracle platform, and what does that look like? How do we sustain it? What am I going to use to pay for it now? What am I going to use to pay for it in the future? And who's going to use this thing? Is it just for me and my staff? Is it legislators? Is it other people in my organization? Who's going to be using the information that I'm going to be presenting? All right, Joseph, I think you're up, unless I have one more slide. Nope, that's on you.
Sure. So the summary is really what Stephanie just said, but coming out of this session, there are really three goals. One is to help you define the type of analytics needed to meet your organization's needs. The second, understanding what tools are out there. As Stephanie said, there is no shortage of analytics and BI tools, but it's important to know how they fit together and which is best for you, and understanding how they integrate and then which can achieve your goals is kind of one of the key points we want to focus on. We call this analytics as a journey. As Stephanie said, many vendors will say that their product is a one-size-fits-all. You procure some budget, go out, download the software, install it, and then all of a sudden you have analytics. And it's really more of a journey than that. And part of the real work is defining where you are currently on that journey and then where you want to be. There's a quote here from Carly Fiorina. It says, simply, the goal is to turn data into information and information into insight. For the most part, raw data is pretty cryptic, but the whole purpose of analytics and visualizations tools is to turn that raw data into information that has some type of value, and then turning that information into insight, which can drive some type of decision making. And it's really that insight piece where analytics comes into play, and that's kind of your end goal in your journey. For most organizations, they move from focusing on what we call descriptive analytics, which is just past hindsight, to prescriptive analytics, which is future foresight. So if you look at the chart on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see at the lower left corner we have what's called descriptive analytics. That's where most organizations start out at. It's what happened in the past, counting the number of events or occurrences, requires minimal technology investment, and really it provides minimal value. And this is what traditional business intelligence is focused on. For organizations that incorporate analytics are those that really move up this graph. So increasing in value and, of course, in difficulty, you move to diagnostic, predictive, and what we call prescriptive. So diagnostic is why did it happen? So it's one thing to know what happened. The next step is to do some analysis to understand why it happens. And to do that, you have to go beyond your minimal technology investment. Maybe you're using Excel, and actually invest in some integration processes to manage these data sets and identify any correlations. And we'll talk about some of the tools that are available for that. The next step in the journey is what we call predictive analytics. And so that goes a step further and talks about quantifying the likelihood of a future event. So we know what happened in the past. We have an idea of why it happened. Now let's use that information to build some type of model that will predict the probability of that event or occurrence happening in the future. And then the last step in the journey is what we call prescriptive analytics. So we know what happened, we know why it happened, we have a good idea of what's going to happen in the future. How can we use this information to influence the future and change future behavior, future events? And that's really kind of the end of the journey. Now, it looks good to say that we're moving up this scale and we're going to end up to the upper right-hand corner, but not every organization needs to achieve that because, as this kind of x-axis indicates, it is pretty difficult to go from hindsight to foresight. But we'll talk about the tools that are available out there to do that. And with that, we're going to have a quick Power BI demo. And then after that, Tasmia will kind of walk through how this Power BI dashboard incorporates the different components of analytics that we just talked about.
All right, thank you, Joseph. Let me pull up the report real quick. All right, so I made this Power BI report. I got the data off of the APD website. So this is all of the crime that happened in Atlanta in 2017, and we have it broken down by month. And then I made a few visualizations to sort of highlight how we can look into this data and how it can be useful. So here on the City of Atlanta map, we have all of the neighborhoods in Atlanta, so we can hover over them and sort of see what the crime frequency was per neighborhood. And the lighter colors are the places that there was less crime, and the darker colors are the ones where there was more crime. So specifically, we can see here in downtown Atlanta that there was the most crime because it's the darkest of the red. So if we click on downtown, we can filter the entire page to just downtown statistics. So this is useful specifically so we can see, oh, well, there were 834 larceny from vehicle crimes in downtown out of the 9,000 that happened over the entire year. So we can sort of look at a larger view of this frequency by crime and see what crimes were the most not popular, but the most frequent in downtown. If we go back to the report, we can also highlight this frequency by month graph and see sort of where the crime occurred the most. So in May, we have the biggest spike in crime, whereas in some of the other months, we have a lesser crime. And that might just be because it's warmer out in Atlanta, and that's sort of an insight that we can draw from some of this data. So if we go back, and since we saw that all of this was particular to May, let's filter the whole page to May, and we can do that by clicking this May, and I have it set as a bookmark as well, so we can move through it a little quicker. So now we see specifically what crimes happened in May, and from that 834 we saw earlier, we now see that 82 of them were in May. So now another sort of interesting graph I made was this crime by hour. So the crime by hour sort of shows us when the crime occurs the most, and we can sort of see where it drops early morning and then picks back up as it gets later in the day, and we sort of see maybe this is a better time to deploy more police officers versus maybe not so many around this time. And we'll be able to look at that more when we go into the sort of crime analysis. The other piece is this little table that we have at the bottom, which gives us a bigger detailed view. We can see what date the crime happened, what time it happened, and then what type of crime. This also gives us the specific location. So in future, if APD were to use this, they could sort of see which specific streets have the most crime and what types of crime happen in these sort of streets, and sort of see what they can do to sort of prevent that in the future. So this is a basic overview of the City of Atlanta Crime Report. If we move to the next tab, which is the crime analysis, we can sort of take a deeper dive into what this crime means. So here we have sort of little leading questions, which neighborhood has the highest crime rate, and we can sort of see the bigger ones, downtown, midtown, Old Fourth Ward. And then when are the largest influxes in crime? So here I took the top times of the day, the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and we see like 8 p.m. is about the biggest influx of crime occurring. And then here we can also see which crimes occur the most often, and just as we saw in the previous page, it's the larceny from vehicle. But what's interesting is if we were to click different neighborhoods, we can sort of see, for example, here at Lenox, this will update. All right, I'll just stick to my bookmarks. It looks like this is going a little slower. But if we filter, let's say, to Midtown, we can see where the crimes, what Midtown crimes happen the most, and then we can also get this KPI view of the crime rate. So here we can sort of look at that frequency by crime again at midnight, and it's that 8 p.m. spike. If we go back to the report, we can also see a bigger view of the larceny from vehicle happening the most in Midtown. So to the left here on this page, I made sort of a how can we use this in the future and sort of predict what would happen. So here we can pick from any of the neighborhoods, and we already have Midtown selected, but we can select it again. And here all of the neighborhoods are represented, but since we are looking at Midtown, we can sort of see we have a budget of $10,000. These numbers are sort of just made up by me, but we can change them to whatever is useful when making the reports. And the crime rate is 5%. So if we deployed one more additional officer, how would that affect the crime rate, and how would that affect the budget? So the budget would go down 2,000, and the crime percent would go down by 0.1%. So this could be useful for APD if they have a certain amount of budget and they're trying to target higher crime areas. They can use some form of predictive analytics to sort of see how many officers they can deploy to reduce this crime rate and how will that affect their budget. So overall, this report can help Atlanta PD sort of figure out what they can do and where the biggest crime rates are and what the biggest types of crimes are, and figure out what they can do from there. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.
And I think I want to kind of point out some things. So the fact that, say, larceny from vehicles, X number of these occurrences happen at a certain time, that's what we consider descriptive events. It's just straightforward what happened. The fact that there's some correlation between crime at a certain time and maybe the number of officers that were in that neighborhood at a certain time, that would be diagnostic. So that's integrating two different data sets to kind of figure out why something happened. Instead of just counting the number of crimes, we want to identify why it happened. Maybe to your point, we also integrate weather data, and we know that, in May, temperatures increase or school's out and crime tends to happen more. To go from just counting number of crimes to some type of insight, you have to integrate various data sets. And the last piece, what we call predictive analytics, is really that slider where you have additional officers deployed. To make that really valuable, you have to come up with some type of statistical model that ties the crime to the number of officers. And that allows you to do this what-if analysis. And then you tie in some budget information, maybe some cost of officers per hour to understand, all right, I can decrease crime by adding X number of officers, but that's also going to impact my budget. But for this amount, I can quantify what I expect the crime rate to decrease to. So it's a very nice visualization that tells a story, but I want to point out that it takes a lot of pre-work to get to the point where all of these different data sets are integrated, and it's that pre-work that we're going to talk about for the next couple slides.
Thank you, Joseph, and I'll hand the presentation back to you.
All right, so let's talk about the different tools that you need to be aware of to get to the point where you can do prescriptive analytics. So when you're talking about analytics, there are really three main things you need to do. One is integrate and manage the data. So this is access data from various sources and integrate into a single platform. In this case, it would be crime data, some police, maybe timesheet data, weather data, information like that. The next step is analyze. So we have this data integrated in one place. Let's develop some type of model or do some analysis to identify any correlations. And the last step is probably the most important, that's to tell the story. You can do all the analysis in the world, but if you're not able to communicate the results and the so what to your stakeholders, then it really doesn't matter. And we'll go through each of these three items. So data integration, when it comes to defining kind of what your data integration platform, there are three considerations, three key considerations. Number one, what are the various sources of data and who owns them? It's very rare that your organization has all the data that's needed internally to do real analysis. So the first step is to identify kind of what are the different data sets that we think will be relevant to our analysis, and figure out who owns the data sets, and then what level of data is available. In the case of APD, this is publicly available information. Weather data is also publicly available information. The only thing you probably have to reach out to someone for, and for this example, would have been understanding what officers, number of officers deployed, and the cost of officer hours. The second is what are your organization's data governance policies? So many organizations don't have data governance policies, but you really need them, especially nowadays with so much concern around PII, data security, and hacking. Your policies will define how you manage PII, so information that identifies people or any health information. It will also guide you on whether you can use some newer cloud-based solutions or on-premise solutions. In general, cloud-based solutions tend to be cheaper. With on-premise, you have to have a big upfront investment. With cloud-based solutions, you pay as you use it. So instead of paying, let's say, $20,000 to buy database technology, I'm just going to pay $100 a month for the first couple of months, and I can scale up as I use more of the data storage. Third, what technologies are already available? As Stephanie mentioned, if you're a Microsoft shop and you have maybe some enterprise agreement with Microsoft, it might make sense to go with SQL Server as opposed to going with the Oracle solution. And you just have to kind of identify, what your budget is and what technologies or technology agreements you already have available that you can leverage. On the right-hand side, we have some cloud platforms that you may have heard of. AWS is Amazon, Azure, Google Cloud. I point these out because, like I said, most cloud offerings are subscription-based, so instead of making a huge upfront investment, you can pay incrementally as you use the services per month. And then below that are some of the database options that are available. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are kind of the popular ones or ones that people are most familiar with. Any questions about that before I go to the next step, which is the analyze phase? All right. So let's say we have our data integrated in one place. We've chosen our platform. The data is sitting there. The next step is to actually look at the data and try to find some insights. So a couple of key considerations is understanding what level of reporting or analytics is expected by your stakeholders. And you know that by understanding what questions they're going to ask. If you don't know what questions are going to be asked, you don't know what data is necessary, and you won't know what level of analysis is needed to meet expectations. Analytics is a pretty vague term. It can be anything from just counting the number of events. It can be coming up with some type of correlation. It can be coming up with some type of machine learning or statistical model. The questions your stakeholders are asking are really going to drive what level of analytics you need. What is the budget? So a lot of tools will require some upfront investment, or if you don't have that much of a budget, you can start out on a cloud platform where you only pay as you use the solution. So instead of making a huge investment in maybe SPSS, you can use some Azure services or AWS services where you just pay per minute for the actual processing power that you use. You also want to take a look at what technologies are already available and then what skill sets. So even with all these great technologies, if you don't have the knowledge within your organization or the right people, whether they be statisticians or data scientists, you're going to have problems. So you definitely want to be aware of where your gaps are and your personnel's ability to do real analytics. And on the right-hand side, same cloud platforms and then some different analytics solutions. Azure Machine Learning, Amazon has something similar. R, you may have heard of, is open source statistical analysis. SAS is definitely not open source, but it's a big name in that arena also. And then, of course, IBM SPSS. Another quote here from Stephen Levitt says, "Data, I think, is one of the most powerful mechanisms for telling stories. I take a huge pile of data and I try to tell stories. So let's assume that you have all of your data in one place. You've done some great analysis. What makes a good visualization great as opposed to a regular one is how you communicate the information or how you tell the story that your analysis has found. And so there are many different analytics tools, many different visualization tools. Some key considerations are, who is the audience? So is this just for internal analysis? Do you have external stakeholders? Are they policymakers and some type of government entity? Understanding whether your stakeholders are internal or external is very important because there are different pricing options depending on whether someone is internal to your organization or external. Also want to look at what we call the personas of users. So there are some people that are just going to create content, and there's some people that are just going to consume your content. And usually the pricing structure for these different licenses are different based on these different personas. So you need to understand in your organization, is it going to be one or two power users who distribute content to everyone else, or do you want to enable everyone in your organization to create their own content from the different data sources that you've integrated together? Third consideration is how much of the necessary data integration and analytics will be done by other tools. Some of the vendors in the visualization space are really good at storytelling, but their tools aren't good for integrating data, whereas other tools are really good at integrating data, but the visualizations are as nice. So if you have a platform where you've done all the data integration work upstream, and you just need a nice tool to tell a story, you may choose something different from an organization that isn't really integrating the data upstream, and they need a visualization tool to help do that. And the last consideration here is what tools are already available. People who work in organizations that are Microsoft shops tend to lean towards Power BI, which is a Microsoft tool. Just important to be aware of what the learning curve may be for the people in your organization for the next, for the visualization tools you're considering. I'll take a moment there, stop and see if there are any questions before we move forward.
Hey, Joseph, this is Steph. I did want to add to the integration piece and the use of tools to integrate. So I will say this, as someone who has futzed around, not necessarily a ton, but enough with some tools trying to integrate different data sets that we work with, using some of the integration capabilities like that Click has or even that Power BI has or whatever, and probably not any of the translation tools or whatever. But if I have any advice to give, and tell me if I'm wrong, Joseph, but I would say to the degree that you can integrate and do your transformations and set up a back-end integrated data warehouse or data vault that then you connect to, life is so much easier. Because, and that requires, and we can talk about it as the webinar progresses, that does require for you to have a developer and for you to have someone who knows how to do ETL, extract, transform, load, scripting, and all of that good stuff. But what you pay up front to get it done will save you so much heartache on the backside, because trying to do transformations and translations while you're also trying to build a visualization can be maddening.
Yeah, I think you have a valid point there, because even, building the visualization will be hard, but if you haven't integrated the data upstream, you'll have 5 different people using the same tool, looking at the same data sets that will come up with different answers because they integrate the data themselves in a different way. So the good thing about doing the work upstream is it's less work for your end users, and you don't have to go through the cycles of identifying, well, how did you connect these data sets, and why is the way you did it different from the way that so-and-so did it, and you all got completely different answers starting from the same data. All right. I will pass it to Tasmia to go into a little more detail about Power BI, which is a tool that we had earlier for the sample.
I guess, yeah. All right, thank you, Joseph. So a basic overview of Power BI, it's part of the Microsoft suite, and it was based off of the Excel-based add-ins, Power Query, Power Pivot, and Power View. And if you've used those, you know you build them off of the Excel sheets and you sort of have them sitting in your sheets and you can integrate them within SharePoint. So Power BI sort of took some of those concepts and made it into its own visualization tool. So it was first released in 2015, and the nice thing about it is when it first came out, it was lacking a lot of features, but every month they come out with an update. So they add in more features, and they base it a lot off of the Power BI community. So if there's something you want to see, it's likely somebody else wants to see it, and you can sort of search for it and vote for it, and that's how they decide what to add next. So with Power BI, you can add data management capabilities, including data prep, discovery, and visualizations. So the nice piece on that data prep is that even if your data hasn't been perfectly formatted or transformed, you can pull it into Power BI and make some of those changes yourself. Another thing is that it integrates with a lot of Microsoft tools, so Power Apps, Flow. You can embed Power BI into your own application that you've made in Visual Studio, and so that makes it pretty flexible. So next slide. So a few things about Power BI. So the price point of Power BI is a lot lower than some of its competitors with a $10 per month per user entry fee if you want to get the Pro license. Now, if you do want to get your entire enterprise onto Power BI, the price does go up, but for most people, the capabilities at the Pro level are all that they need. As I was talking about the data preparation, Power BI has its own little environment where you can do some data modeling and data prep. This is useful so that you don't have to do it in any other software, and you can have it all within the desktop application. So Power BI also works seamlessly with all of the Microsoft suite, including Azure. So you can connect to any of the data that you have up in your Azure web space. You can integrate Power BI into all of the Azure cloud services. And then the other part of Power BI is that it includes direct query, which then connects to live data and prevents any memory issues, and you can have a better interaction with your Power BI report. Next slide. So here are the three types of services that I was originally talking about. So the basic view of Power BI, that one's free. If you have a company email address, all you have to do, and you can do this now or after this presentation, is just sign up for Power BI, download it, and you can have access to building any sort of report that you want. The downside to basic is that although you can publish the report into your own space, you still have to have a license to share it with anybody else in your organization. You can email them the Power BI report that you made, so that's a little bit of a workaround if you don't need an entire workspace, but basic covers everything you need to start getting yourself into Power BI. So the Pro license is the one that I was also talking about, where you can, it's $10 per user per month, and you can share everything you make. You can control your workspaces. So if you make a workspace that you only want certain people in, you can have that, and then you can have a separate workspace for other people, so you can sort of control who sees what. The Pro also allows you to have row-level security, so you can keep your data pretty private and secure with that. And then the final tier of the Power BI service is Premium. So this is sort of enterprise licensing, and the pricing depends per company, and basically this is good for larger organizations that have company-wide Power BI needs and capabilities. So here's sort of the Power BI lifecycle. If you start at the left, you can see that you can connect hundreds of data sources. So as in the little icons, you can sort of see SQL and Cloud, but if you can think of it, it most likely can connect to Power BI. One of the things, though, that Power BI is a little bit limited in is if you do have multiple data sources, you can't connect the same report to multiple data sources. So to get around that, you can definitely create your own views and format your data beforehand and get it into one sort of source, and then you can connect it into the Power BI service. So as you can see, once you connect to the Power BI service, you can use, and this little gateway thing you see at the bottom is for Power BI Premium, and that's for your entire organization's data, and that is a higher, more, I'm trying to think of the right word, but it's more expensive and it's more, it's not necessary for building off reports and starting initial investigation into your data, basically. So from there, you can publish your Power BI report. You can access it via tablets, phones, and the web. You can also, if you don't want to have it online, you can have it on your desktop, and you can see it from there as well. And that's, is there another slide? And so that is basically the overall Power BI look and feel. And feel free to, if you have any questions in the future, you can always reach out to me, and I'm always available to answer anything you need. So this is, I'll hand it back to Joseph.
Yes, Stephanie, do you want to talk about the funding options?
Yeah, so how did we pay for this, meaning we at the state of Georgia? So we are part of the state administering agency, right? And I think, as many of you know, and I have preached extensively, because I, in particular, came out of the victim services world, and I was, like, for a hot second, the VOCA administrator. I ended up taking with me all of the reporting for VOCA, which bully for us, because now there's a ton of VOCA to pay for stuff. But the discovery work that Slalom did, which sounds like it would be a lot and very intensive, it wasn't. I mean, they're like the most efficient humans on the planet. I'm convinced of it. But the discovery work that they did was paid for with our State Justice Statistics grant, and specifically we applied under the expanding access to statistical information area of impact. So we applied for the funding there to do the discovery work. We actually did it over the course of 2 years, first and foremost to figure out what our information management strategy was and how we could go about sharing data. We built a little SharePoint site that our partners could send data to if we wanted to receive data from external sources. And then in the second year, Joseph worked with us to figure out and catalog all of our internal data sources and what those look like and what our shared dimensions were, and then, you know, help us arrive at a final solution for how we were going to build a data warehouse, what it was going to look like, and then what ultimately visualization tool we were going to use to present those data. So now we're in the implementation phase of this. I have 2 contractors that I've hired. One of them is a business analyst / programmer who is working on setting up the data warehouse and all of the infrastructure in Azure. We are an Office 365 shop, so we have an enterprise agreement. Joseph talked about whether or not your agency has an enterprise agreement. So we have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, which means that we have Microsoft Office 365 in the cloud, which gives us Azure for cloud storage, which we're leveraging to build our data warehouse. And then, so I've got a programmer / business analyst who is working on that, and then I have a developer and data architect actually mapping out what the data warehouse looks like. And all of this is funded with various different sources based on the data source that I'm importing. So we're the SAA, we manage all VOCA, LAWA, SASP, all state domestic violence and sexual assault funding, all victims compensation funding, burn JAG. You name most of the major criminal justice funding sources, formula or otherwise, we manage them. So we're leveraging a lot of those funds to build the data warehouse and pay for the contractor's time depending on which fund source it is that they are architecting or doing translations for. I have been steadily chugging along building out my staff to be responsive to these needs. So right now, I am a party of 8, hopefully going on 10 soon. And I have very strategically brought in people who have SQL programming, SQL Server, and ETL skills to be permanent staff on my team, because somebody is going to have to babysit and continue to do translations with this data warehouse. And that person is going to have to live on my team. So they are paid for, because we have access to all those different fund sources, they're paid for with VOCA or VAWA or SASP or whatever it is based on the data that they're working on. That's the fund source that we use to pay for it. We have very little state money as an organization, largely, and when I say state money, I mean state money for administrative overhead purposes, not for programmatic purposes, like the domestic violence and sexual assault money, or even our accountability court funds that are state appropriated. We can only use that for programs. We can't really use that for administrative stuff. So there's very little in terms of a state appropriation going into this endeavor. It's really largely whichever federal fund source this is going to hit, that's what we're using to pay for that. Because ultimately, the people in my organization who are going to use this are our grant managers, our victims compensation division, our grant specialists while they're doing performance reviews or site visits. They can go and find an agency and look at their performance over time, because all of those data are going to be in there. And external stakeholders, our hope is that we'll have access for the Office of Planning and Budget within the state of Georgia, so that they can readily go and look at whether it's accountability court measures that we produce for them on a regular basis, or domestic violence or sexual assault measures that they request of us, that they can look at all of those different things and really be able to share the information that we have in-house that takes hours and hours and hours and hours to churn and produce into these static ad hoc reports into something that is way more dynamic and will hopefully save us a lot of time in the long run with staff. You know, I think at the JRSA Eastern Regional, we talked a lot about getting by with a little help from our friends and data sharing and what does that look like, and building relationships. And one of the things that came out of my early and kind of ill-thought-out efforts at reaching out to agencies in Georgia, like the Georgia Bureau of Investigations or the Department of Corrections, and what was at the time the State Board of Pardons and Parole. They still exist, but all of the supervisory functions are now this new entity called the Department of Community Supervision, is that people started to figure out what I wanted to do. And we are a Justice Reinvestment Initiative state, and as we are winding down our Justice Reinvestment Initiative grants, there's this, you know, hanging Chad question, well, where are you going to put the performance measures? As a JRI state, you have to have performance measures up. And so Department of Community Supervision and Georgia Department of Corrections decided, well, we know that Stephanie's doing this data warehouse thing over there. Why are we going to do something from scratch at either one of our agencies? We'll just put it over at CJCC. So I wrote for money for them to give us $200 grand out of Council of State Government's sub-award that was going to go to them. Well, we're under contract with them to produce the JRI metrics and measures interfaces with our data warehouse, because we've already got, we're about half of the way there in terms of having the infrastructure set up, knowing what our integration points are, having some sense of how to do the discovery on this thing. So Solomon is going to help us do the discovery on that and set up our KPIs and so on. And then we've got my contractors who are already working on the database, or on the data warehouse, I should say, do the data architecture and the actual implementation. Sounds overwhelming, and it's taken a very long time, and that's the other key takeaway that I would leave for folks is don't expect Rome to be built in a day. It takes years. I've been working on this since my SJS 2015 award. So it's not quick and easy, but it is well worth the time and the investment for what I expect will be a pretty spectacular end product once we're done with all of it. Questions?
Hi, Stephanie. This is Erin. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat box to see if any questions pop up. Jason, in the meantime, do you want to release the poll and give people a couple minutes if they want to ask a question? Thank you. Okay. So Stephanie, you mentioned in the meantime, you mentioned you guys are 10 people for staff-wise?
You cut out.
Oh, I was just saying you had mentioned you're expanding to 10 people for staff at your agency. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I would say that probably not quite half, but a good percentage of them are going to be VOCA funded.
Oh, great.
Administrative dollars. Because manage the reporting, so we do all of the PMC reporting for the VOCA administrator for every single organization. We have over 250 subs. So we collect data, process it, and we submit it to the PMT. We produce all kinds of reports and stuff for them around application time. We're doing a wage analysis, for instance, of all of their VOCA applications to help them figure out what's a living wage in different regions throughout the state. We are going to be the DBAs for a new case management system that we are providing to the domestic violence and sexual assault centers throughout the state. And that DBA is going to live in my shop because I am tired of getting crappy data. I have made a play, and we're going to get a database administrator position for that. We manage all of the outcome performance measures for all of our victim services subrecipients. So I've got a programmer that is 100% VOCA funded that manages all of the data collection tools that we use for our victim services subgrantees. I've got an analyst that analyzes all the data. Sandra, she will actually be at Colorado Springs. And, and then this DBA who's coming on, I'm hoping that I will get a second research analyst. We'll be posting for that soon because we have so many subgrantees and so much data that really a lot of the ongoing validation and kind of anomalies and all of that stuff we discover when we produce ad hoc reports. And at that point, it's like too late to go back to the agency to say, hey, why are you reporting that you served 200 Native Americans this quarter?
Oh, it looks like we have a question, if you don't mind me interrupting real quick. It's asked, the question is, does Power BI work well with Alteryx? I hope I'm saying that right.
So it depends on what you're trying to do, but if you want to connect to Alteryx from Power BI, you can do it.
Yeah, and I've seen Alteryx kind of used as if you're using Alteryx as the data integration tool, you usually use Alteryx to dump it somewhere. So whether you dump it to a flat file or to a database, and then you connect Power BI to that database is normally how I've seen that used.
But there is also an Alteryx plugin where you can throw in a data source. Like there's a macro, I think, where you can get a bunch of data and then it'll generate a Power BI report for you.
Great, thank you. We only have a few more minutes left, so I also want to take this opportunity just to thank you all for participating, Stephanie, Joseph, and Tasmia, and also let everyone who's participating know that JRSA is in the process of planning the agenda for the Eastern Regional Conference, which is going to be in Georgia. That was at a site that was volunteered by Stephanie, so that is awesome, and we are very appreciative of that and looking forward to that conference. And so that's going to be December 5th to the 7th. And so we'll definitely be giving Stephanie and staff from the Georgia SAC the opportunity to talk more about the research that they're doing. It sounds like there's a lot going on. So I'm looking forward to that. But we're working out the agenda right now. So if there's anything that there are any SACs participating that are interested in participating, getting involved in a session, you know, don't be shy, reach out to me, and we can see if we can put a session together for the conference. But with that, is there any way that people can get in touch with you if they do have any additional questions after the webinar is over?
Yeah, so on the introduction slide, all of our email addresses are. Great. It's about the easiest way. Yeah.
Okay, great. And yeah, and this will be available on our webpage, archive, so people can go there to get that information and also rewatch it or share it with your friends and family. So great. Well, I do want to thank everybody again, presenters and also the attendees. And I think that is it. So have a good afternoon, and thank you all.
And don't be scared by our crime statistics. Our office is it's a bright red spot on the map, but I promise I'm here every single day. And it's nothing to be afraid of. Totally fine.
Yeah. Just lock your car doors, that's all.
Just lock your car doors.
Yeah, yeah. All right, thank you all again. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.